but we feel like it's a good team. And if this is our team going into spring training or opening day, we're pretty excited by it.
I just heard nothing but
Welcome to the weekly podcast of the Rooftop Sports. Here I am, of course, the Rooftop Sports. Here I am also joined by the Steve Silver, aka the branding Iron Hot. Wonder what that's all about.
Yeah, that's the old Dave Niehausism. You know, when Randy Johnson was pitching that final pitch in the '95 one-game playoff. You know, when Johnson was looking in, I think I got Tim Salmon, Dave Niehaus was on the call, and he said, and you know, Randy's looking in, branding Iron Hot. You know what I mean? And then
a 1-2 pitch,
yeah.
He got it in there right over to the heart of the plate. Randy looks to the sky.
The sky in Bedlam, yeah. But it also applies to this too, because if you're a Mariner fan looking for traction and you're mad, technically speaking, you can be branding Iron Hot.
Honestly, this could be it, but here we are with the show, and we are doing it under the snowstorm, which happened again. Yeah. Like, this weather's been so weird, flip-flop. It's like it snows and then it melts, and then it doesn't even snow, and then it's snowing again. So it's like the weather's like, what are you doing? And it's like, and I'm like yelling at the weather going, hey, I have a basketball tournament for my friend's Special Olympics tournament. I don't want that to be delayed because it's the only basketball I really have to watch right now. Yeah. I won't watch the NBA.
So, you know, my wonderful ex-wife, who still lives in the Puget Sound area up in the North Sound, told me that they got about 4 inches up there in the Granite Falls area, and it snowed again. And she was saying that as far as the cold goes, this is the coldest Western Washington has been in quite some time. You know, I remember, you know, especially during like big snowstorms, it'll snow anywhere between 4 to 8 inches, and then it'll freeze for a week in the Seattle area. You know, like a big snowstorm usually follows temperatures that are in the teens for like about a week. You know, you gotta keep your water dripping a little bit so your pipes don't freeze. But you know, this was you know, it's a little interesting that it's coming a little bit later as we are approaching. We're already in February, right? So this snowstorm typically didn't hit Seattle where it usually hits Seattle, which is kind of right there in that early January bubble.
Sounds about right, but unfortunately for this show, it's not exactly going to be a cold show. It's going to be a hot show. Yes.
The question was, did the Mariners have the roof closed?
I'm pretty sure they did.
Or did they have the tarps down and just left the roofs open?
I don't know. I think that's just the tip of the iceberg of concerns. But before we get into, we are going to talk about Jerry Dipoto and his 20-minute long Zoom press conference. And I needed another 12 hours to digest to it. I needed a full hour workout to just digest to it. But before we do any digesting and possibly rants, let's have SeatGeek give me another 25 seconds. SeatGeek is a mobile ticketing app for sporting events, concerts, and other events. They make the buying experience easier by the app ranking each ticket from 0 to 10 to see if you are getting a good deal, and you can see exactly where you are sitting. I regularly use that app, and I have had nothing but a fantastic experience with SeatGeek. Use my promo code RoofTopSports to get $20 off of your first purchase. Link to the code, app, and website will be in the description, so take advantage, and thank you. If you're going to the Super Bowl, use that promo code. All right, let's get to the point. So we're going to go over the 8 questions that Jerry Dipoto answered in this press conference. And I just want to give a shout out to our friend Couch GM, who beautifully put everything all together in his video. I asked him like, hey, can I use all the Jerry questions and all that B-roll footage that you use? And he was like, yeah, go for it. So
nice.
Let's get to that first question. Yeah, Couch GM for sure. Yeah,
credit the Couch GM.
Yeah, and
you know, I like the fact that he's I like the fact that he's not afraid to like put himself out there as a backseat driver, just with the name of Couch GM, right? Couch You're like GM, you are literally second guessing the guys that are actually doing it. I love it, man. I'm all for it.
Yeah, and please subscribe to him. And now, the first question.
Well, you know, from the start, when we met, we all met at season's end, talked about, I think the positive trend that developed over the season's final 6 weeks, the way we saw our team come together. I think especially notable was the uptick we saw in our offense, and you know, the group generally played well together. And one of our points going into this offseason, and I know I made it sitting in the dugout in the final series there, was that we didn't anticipate a great deal of movement around the team. And, as we are now about a week away from headed to spring training, I'd say that probably played out to be spot on, much to, I think, the dismay of a few. But we have a good team. And, we went into the offseason with what we thought were needs at first base, second base, third base. And, I'd mentioned before, we viewed first base as a potential, for a platoon with Luke Raley playing, the bigger role, and, perhaps looking there for someone who could support him from the right side on what I would call, the short end of a platoon at first base, or do something more permanent if the opportunity presented itself. The other was second base, third base. We felt like we could fill one of those spots internally, and the other spot was likely going to be external. At that point, we didn't pick up the option on Jorge Polanco, and we made the choice to non-tender Josh Rojas, meaning that we would no longer had full capability of covering that spot internally. And a combination of Dylan Moore and Ryan Bliss and what we feel is a bright future for Cole Young, Leo Rivas really presented us with some flexibility there. So that's the backdrop, and here we are. We went out and we added what we think is a real veteran presence in our clubhouse, quiet pro, and a guy like Donovan Solano, who's been excellent against left-hand pitching and pretty good against the righties as well. He can play a number of different positions, but in recent years, it's been more first base, third base, and not necessarily in that order. And we felt like, the addition of Donovan really gave us a stabilizer. It allowed us to have a potential answer at one or two positions, or it allowed us the ability to platoon at either. And that came on the heels of falling short on a free agent or two, and not really liking where the trade market was taking us. And then here in recent weeks, we have had a dialogue really throughout the offseason with Jorge Polanco, and we were satisfied with where he was from a health perspective. We were excited that he was optimistic about how he felt and about returning to the Mariners. Is he now knows our ballpark. He's familiar with our clubhouse. He knows our manager and staff. And, I thought it was a real positive that he chose to be here. So that's how we chose to fill these holes. We're still open if the opportunity to add exists out there. But we feel like it's a good team. And if this is our team going into spring training or opening day, we're pretty excited by it.
Saw a lot of shaking heads during that talk of Jerry Dipoto. Like, first thing that sticks out was he was like, yeah, well, we tried these two free agents, didn't really work out. And then, we tried the trade with the Luis Castillo trade, didn't really work out. And then all of a sudden he says, oh yeah, but we've refilled the holes with Donovan Solano and Jorge Polanco, which is strange because they said that they really needed to fill holes per Justin Hollander, but of course they didn't do that. So there's a lot of dishonesty and disingenuousness out of Jerry Dipoto on this one.
I just heard nothing but bullshit. I got to be honest with you, man. It was big words surrounded. It's the ability to say something without saying anything at all, right? The idea that you're going to because you don't necessarily have internal candidates, that you're comfortable with playing 162, playing anywhere between 120 and 130 ball games day in, day out. That goes for Dylan Moore, Ryan Bliss. You were too afraid to go out and address areas of need via trade because you understood exactly what that was going to mean. You're going to have to give up one of your starting pitchers, knowing that that's still an area of depth in order to improve, right? The whole Peter to pay Paul trade philosophy, right? You want to rob Peter to pay Paul. So instead of taking a gamble in a season where, let's be honest, I don't consider the Mariners a good team. I think they're a decent team at best. And we've seen this the last 2 years that as they've been spinning their wheels as a fringe contender. Because they are unwilling to do the uncomfortable things, they do things that make them comfortable, like bringing in maybe a slightly better version of
Jorge Polanco.
Dylan Moore. No, like a slightly better version of Dylan Moore in Donovan Solano, who's probably going to be your starting third baseman. And they re-signed Jorge Polanco because of the comfortability with him. Never mind the fact that there's a good chance that he's going to miss 2 months of the season at like the worst opportune times for him to get injured. That's probably going to happen. And when I look at this, and as this team heads into spring training, you're just left shaking your head. Here's the thing. I don't think Jerry Dipoto's stupid. I don't think he's an idiot whatsoever. I think that he is a guy who believes in his system to a fault. Like, he believes that the course that he's taking, not being risk averse, being risk averse and not willing to take it, is going to lead this team to great things. And yet, we have seen over the course of the last 2 years, when you're throwing darts at a dartboard because you're unwilling to hand out a long-term contract, the results are exactly what they are. Eventually you're going to have to fill positions with guys that are in their prime, that are going to be around for at least 3 years, that is going to give your pitching staff enough run support for them to be able to do their job. And I'm sorry, bringing Donovan Solano to be a third baseman when Luis Urias didn't work out last year. You know what I mean? When you're talking about Leo Rivas and you're talking about Ryan Bliss playing significant roles, and I'm just shaking my head thinking to myself, like, dude, you talk about the perception and reality of your offense, but the reality is that both are true, because we're not stupid. Like, you can't sell it anymore. That's my biggest problem. It's like, it's not that he doesn't get it, like the fans' anger. It's like he can't sell it to anymore because we've seen it. We've seen, like, even in their playoff year of 2022, there were things about that offense where you're kind of like, well, they strike out too much, or they don't hit well with runners in scoring position, and then you try to address it, and of course it never gets fixed. And so we saw it in 2023, we saw it in 2024. It progressively got worse, and he's sitting there trying to sell what is not a good team, but again, a fringe playoff team. Like, that's what this team is. Because of their pitching, they'll always be that. But does anybody in the Seattle area really think this team is going to win the division? Or do you really think this team is going to make the playoffs or make a deep run at this stage? Probably not.
No.
I don't think anybody believes that.
And regarding Polanco, he is playing third base, which does leave room for concern because he's not exactly great on defense. Like, he's not going to be a Eugenio Suarez. He's not going to be a Kyle Seager. He may not even be Josh Rojas defensively at this point.
Like, why would you bring him back to play a position that's not natural to him? Like, at second base, like, yeah, he sucks defensively. Like, he's a liability at second base, but at least he's decent enough to man the position. You know what I mean? It's like he even said it, Donovan Solano is a first baseman, third baseman. So play the third baseman at third base and play the second baseman at second base. And if you need to adjust, if something happens and you need to adjust, you can always adjust. But at least make the players on the field comfortable in their natural defensive positions. I don't understand it.
Me neither. And now let's get into the second question, because I think that one question that he answered is just the tip of the iceberg. Here's another one.
To answer the question, if you'll get the chance, I'm sure, to speak to Polo, but he looks great. Physically, he looks great. We had a chance to watch his workouts on, video, and we had some opportunity to visit live. Ulysses Cabrera, who represents Jorge, also has a few of our other players, most notably Julio. We stayed in touch throughout the offseason. Obviously, our medical team was front and center in the original scheduling of the surgery and then visiting with him throughout his rehab, up to and including when we opted not to pick up the option. And they've stayed in contact with him through the offseason. He looks more explosive. I think the most obvious piece of information is just how much easier it is for him to stop his momentum when he's moving forward, when he has that burst or even side to side. The simple drills, baseball drills that towards season's end last year did look painful for Jorge. They no longer look that way. And he says he feels great. I believe him. It looks that way visually. And, we think third base it's the better fit for our roster. We just feel like Dylan Moore's best defensive position is second base. Cole Young, we feel like has incredible, defensive skills. He is naturally a shortstop who's played a lot of second base coming through development and feels better suited to playing in the middle when his time comes. And we could say the same of Ryan Bliss. Ryan has been a middle infielder throughout. He's more comfortable in the middle of the field and more explosive. And we felt like the shorter range position at third base really had a chance to just take a lot of the pressure off of Jorge. That he, to his credit, he kept posting. He kept posting when his knee did not feel right. And obviously it was continuing to aggravate him throughout the year. And he showed up and he gave us a chance by pitching in where he could. And now we get the benefit of a healthy version of Jorge in 2025, and we'll see where it takes us.
Yeah, I can't bank on that. We can't bank on that. I know we've already talked quite a bit about Jorge Polanco, but we've already agreed that his natural position is not third base. And when I looked up his numbers on third base, they are not good numbers. Like, he makes errors. His fielding percentage is awful. And he says things about Ryan Bliss having a good defense, which I disagree. His defense was a 987 with an error. So at this point, the best player on this team in the infield, other than a fringe JP Crawford and Luke Raley, is going to be Cole Young. Like, that's all they've got. Like,
yeah, and to be honest with you, I want Cole Young to start at second base. Like, I don't want to see Dylan Moore playing every single day. And no disrespect to Ryan Bliss, who I like his speed, right? Like, when he gets on base, he has a tendency to wreak havoc on the base pass. I kind of like that. But the reality is, your fifth outfielder should probably be Leo Rivas, because he can probably play both infield, both middle infield spot, second base, shortstop. You still have Dylan Moore. But the reality is, like, I would be more inclined to see Cole Young get his major league debut on opening day. That being said, did you hear Jerry Dipoto admit that he saw Jorge Polanco's improvement via video? Not live, not in person. He didn't get his actual eyes on him. It was sent via video. And then he goes on to say, well, we also had some in-house guys. Now, was that you? Did you fly out to watch his workouts? Was it Justin Hollander who went out and checked out his workouts that gave him the thumbs up, or was it one of your regional scouts? You know what I mean? Like, who in the Mariners chain of front office personnel was the one to actually get eyes on Jorge Polanco? And then he says that he's feeling good, and you take his word for it. It's like, dude. No. Like, this is your job that's on the line. Like, you're like, understand that Jerry Dipoto is in the hot seat. Okay. If this team gets out to a 2-15 start, you're fired. You know what I mean? It's like, you have to make sure that the money that you spend to bring players in to spend accordingly. And that's in conjunction with your medical staff. But for a guy who you're moving to a different position, who is historically not great at that position, and you're banking on it, and you saw him via video, and then you asked him, hey, how you feeling? Oh, I'm feeling great. Yeah, I take his word for it. Okay.
Fools.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you know what we call that? We called that back in the day. We call that incompetence. That's incompetence right there.
That's what exactly he's doing. And then before we get to that third question, like, Stanton really should have fired Dipoto. Like, there was absolutely no point going into the offseason with Jerry Dipoto knowing what he's exactly going to do. And some are going to say, well, the ownership is bad, which I agree. Ownership is an embarrassment. John Stanton's an embarrassment. He makes me miss Howard Lincoln and Chuck Armstrong. That's how bad he is. But there's GMs out there that would still kill to have a 15-something million payroll. That is the Tampa Bay Rays. They'd love to have that kind of payroll to work with. All the other small market teams, Billy Beane with the Oakland A's back in the day would have loved to have this budget. But Jerry Dipoto, and he has all the resources. He's got the prospects, but he just won't do it.
Well,
now the third, yeah.
The crazy thing, and on that, why do you think I've been shouting for Theo Epstein or a guy like Dave Dombrowski, who's going to come in here and understand that the budget for spending this offseason is nothing. Like, you can't even get a C role player through the door with the amount of money that's available. So what they would do is look at this roster and say, okay, our strength is pitching, and we have 4 very young guys. 2 of them are arbitration eligible, 2 of them are not. And we have a guy that's making $25 million who is not giving us $25 million in return on that investment. And they would do the uncomfortable thing, like trade him to the Boston Red Sox for Tristan Casas and Yoshida,
which they should have done.
Right,
Masataka and Yoshida should have done it.
Yeah, Yoshida. And they would have done it because it would give the Mariners a long-term solution at first base, and now all of a sudden you got a DH outfield, you got a full-time DH platooning outfielder. They would have gotten rid of Mitch Garver. They would have tried to get off of Mitch Garver, even if it meant bringing in prospects. And then essentially what you end up doing is you end up bringing in 12 plus, you bring in an extra $37 million to add to your $15 million. And then you can go out and buy a solid veteran catcher to get behind Cal Raleigh. And you can go out there and get a veteran starter, you know what I mean? To plug number 5 while you're still developing the two guys that they drafted last year. You know what I mean? So they would make the uncomfortable decisions. That's all I'm saying.
That's what he should have done, but Jerry won't do it. And now the third question.
Yeah, we just, we went into it again, as we discussed at season's end. We really didn't want to move any of our starting pitching. And, that was where people were hitting us was in the starting rotation. And we were just steadfast in our commitment to hold on to the pitching to the extent that we felt like we could improve, our situation without moving our pitching. We wanted to explore every avenue. And, we did have some conversation around our pitchers, particularly when there were so many phone calls coming in right around the time of the winter meetings. But, it was always our desire to get to opening day with the 5 and that starting 5 is in place and, good health permitting, 5 starting pitchers and we're gonna ride them like we always have.
We were just talking about that. It's almost like we knew what he was going to talk about, but I'm going to say it, and we are going to repeat it. I would have taken that deal for Luis Castillo because Luis Castillo, he's not 2022 Castillo. He's not 2023. And the fact that the Red Sox were going to give us a gift of Masataka Yoshida. Yes, his defense is bad, but he can more than make up of what Mitch Haniger can't do.
Right, but he's a left-handed DH in a ballpark that favors left-handed pull hitters, right? And Yoshida is actually a solid contact hitter, which is something this lineup doesn't have. But mostly, you get your replacement at first base.
And then the Tristan Casas thing that should have happened, and I heard the rumored report on why the Mariners also didn't do it, which I don't really buy at all. Was the whole T-Mobile Park concern that he doesn't hit well in T-Mobile. Granted, that is a statistic that backs it up, but it was only a 7-game sample, so I don't think that's a fair sample. And can't you just trust Edgar Martinez and Kevin Seitzer to fix him up? I mean, Edgar Martinez has hit in T-Mobile Park and has flourished there. He could have taught him how to handle it.
Do you remember when I said that Dipoto can't sell it? Like, this is bullshit right here. This is 100% pure bullshit. And the reality is, just say, like you just said in that last clip, you want to keep your starting pitching intact. You feel that the way to success is going to be through your pitching. Fair enough, right? You're in a ballpark that favors defense and pitching. Understand, it was the blueprint. It was the blueprint that Pat Gillick rode back in the early 2000s. It's understanding the ballpark in which you're playing. So from that aspect, I completely agree. But your bullpen was garbage last year because of the decision to get rid of Paul Sewald because you didn't want to pay him $6 million as a back of the bullpen anchor. You got rid of a guy who you essentially could ride like Zorro. And since then, your bullpen has been in shambles. The buttons that you have pushed have not worked. The two go hand in hand. The reality is, I don't want to hear about the ballpark issues because there's a long line of history of Mariner hitters performing well at T-Mobile Park. I don't want to hear that anymore. It's absolute nonsense. You were afraid of getting rid of a starting pitcher. That's exactly what it was. You were just afraid because you feel like you don't have somebody that can step into your rotation right now. And you didn't want to have to go and get, your veteran starter on the market, even though you probably could have got Jake Flaherty, who went back to Detroit on cheap to be at number 5.
And the concerns I have on Luis Castillo is, and I did 62 Mariners games, and I did a lot of Luis Castillo starts. Mm-hmm. He never looks good and consistent. Like his first pitch, it's a home run that goes all the way to the stands, or might as well say all the way to the moon. Like I had concerns on Castillo.
Yeah, like the consistency of what we saw in the second half of 2022 is long gone. He got his extension, and I wouldn't say that he's not trying hard. It's just his bugaboo is getting hit and tagged early, putting the offense in an insurmountable position where they have to rally back to try to win games. He also has the tendency of throwing a lot of pitches before the 5th inning. So you're not getting extension with Luis Castillo at this point. You're not getting 6. You're not getting 7 from him. You're lucky to get 5, which means you're taxing your bullpen in order to close out games. The reality is if you're paying a starting pitcher to be your ace, you're expecting ace results. You're expecting at least ace consistency. You don't have to go 8 every single outing. To get a return of investment. But what you do have to be is that type of pitcher that's going to give you 6 and 7, that's going to hold offenses to 3 runs or less on a consistent, every 5-day basis. And we're just simply not getting that. The fact that this team is stubborn and not listening to offers. Like I understand the other 4. Like I wouldn't get rid of, Gilbert, Kirby, Miller, or Lou either. Yeah, I wouldn't get rid of those 4 either. But the reality is, one of those guys, whether it's Gilbert, Kirby, or Miller, can step in right now to the number 1. You can bring in a veteran lefty or a veteran, like whatever. You can find
veteran
like,
lefty.
You even got Emerson Hancock in AAA.
Emerson Hancock, or just let Logan Evans give it a shot. And if they are so hung up on T-Mobile Park saying that it suppresses hitters, use that to your advantage. Let Emerson Hancock get the home pitches. What about Logan Evans? If it works, I would be willing to give up the likes of Luis Castillo. Now on to that 4th question.
I think there is the reality of our offense and then the perception of our offense. And, our offense, we play in a tough ballpark to hit in. Our offense has generally been above average based on advanced metrics, WRC plus, things like that for a number of years now. The last 3 years, we've actually had a very stable offense, particularly good on the road. I think one of the top 10 in MLB when we're on the road. And at home, we play in a tough run scoring environment that really benefits our pitching staff, and our players, position players, have been asked to find ways. And we've generally done that. We've turned it into one of the best home records in the league. So, we try not to think too much about how to reconstruct a team for our ballpark. It's working, the way it is. We just have to figure out how to make it work better. And, our team in general, we strike out more at home than on the road. I think that's also true of our opponents. And what we have done is we've built a team of players that on their own, they're very good. And the attrition or potential for players to bounce back from down years, we had a few guys last year who came out and didn't have their best season or got off to slow starts. We added Victor Robles in midseason. We added Randy Arozarena at the trade deadline. We get a full season from what we hope is a resurgent JP Crawford. And we get perhaps the second half of Julio rather than the first. And that goes a long way. You add that to some of the players we had who had breakout seasons like Luke Raley, excellent seasons like Cal Raleigh. We have a good offensive team, and we didn't feel like we needed to do a whole lot, but to find ways to support the group that we had. And, I know the offseason has been long and seemingly slow. We feel, and I said this at season's end, we do feel like we made a lot of progress last year. And, the additions of Arozarena, Robles, Solano, and a healthy Jorge Polanco with what we think will be bounce back seasons from a couple of guys who didn't have their best years stand to be positives for us.
Let me jump on this one. So I looked up the data for generally being a top 10 team, which, by the way, I would not at this point use 22 and even the 23 seasons at all. But in the 24 season, on the road, Mariners were 22nd in batting average and 12th in runs scored. And the reason why we can't use 22 and 23 is you don't have Eugenio Suarez.
Right.
You don't have Teoscar Hernandez. You don't have any of those big hitters anymore, which is why it loses credibility. Like, that's why he said the top. He used those 2 years just so he can BS his way and say, "Oh yeah, we're still a top 10." No, it doesn't work that way, and I don't buy that.
Yeah. So here's the crazy thing, right? So last year, Seattle's WRC plus rated at 104, which puts them at 12. Their wins above replacement, which ranked at 21.3, which was 14th. Their batting average, which was good enough for 29th. They batted 224 last year. Their K percentage was tied for the worst in the league with Colorado. Just from simple RBI metrics, the Seattle Mariners finished 22nd with 642. They just were not good. So you can, he can sit there and say that, there's a perception, there's reality. It's like, no. The reality is that you're trying to sell us something, you're trying to sell us a lemon. The reality is the perception is what you think it is, but the reality is what everybody else has been watching for the last 2 years, which has been it's been inconsistent at best, right? Leading all the way into that dot. You can't tell me that even when the Mariners had broken out to a 10-game lead that their offense was tearing it up, because they were getting unbelievable pitching performances, good bullpen performances, and they were doing what they did a couple years ago, which was winning a lot of one-run games, a lot of close ball games. Okay, great. But they weren't blowing teams out of the water offensively. And then, of course, they go on their slide all the way to the Dodgers series. And from the beginning of that slide, you can't tell me that this offense was a top 10 offense at all. You can't at all. As a matter of fact, it got so untenable that you had to fire your manager, allegedly your best friend, via Twitter. You can't sell it. Now, I will give Dan Wilson and Edgar Martinez a lot of credit because they did turn some things around in that last 6 weeks of the season, which kind of leads you to get to get the warm and fuzzies heading into 2025. But the reality is that it's still pretty much the exact same crew as we saw last year, which was a broken down Mitch Haniger, a broken down Mitch Garver, a broken down Jorge Polanco. Nobody really to protect Julio Rodriguez in that lineup. And you're hoping that Luke Raley takes the next step. You're kind of hoping that
JP Crawford pulls to 23.
That's right. And you're hoping that Polanco stays healthy enough to be decent enough. You're hoping that Randy Arozarena doesn't strike out 400 times next year.
You're hoping doesn't throw a bat and cause a double play.
You're hoping Cal Raleigh hits another 40 home runs while he's batting 220. You know what I mean? So, to me, it's like, again, I understand his wanting to keep pitching intact. I get that. It's a luxury not every team has. Understood. But it's only 50% of the equation. In order to win ball games, you have to score runs. Okay. And you have to do it. You have to at least get into that 4 runs a game clip, that 4 or 5 run game a clip. And it's just like, you can't sit there and sell perception versus reality, because you can't do that with people that actually watch this baseball team.
And the thing is, like, Jerry Dipoto is also counting on that everyone is on bounce back. He's counting on Julio to have an MVP type season. He's counting on Cal Raleigh to not bat below 220. He's banking on J.P. Crawford.
How many years have we heard that they're bringing in players for bounce back seasons, like a change of scenery bounce back? How many years in a row have we been hearing that?
We've lost count. Like, if we had a drinking game over it, we all be dead. And
how about you bring in players that are actually in their prime, that are performing, and you don't have to worry about bounce back because they're legit hitters in this game? How about that? Try doing that.
I don't know.
Just a thought.
Seems like it seems too much of too good of an idea for Jerry Dipoto. But now let's get into that 5th question.
We feel like we're right in the mix. We just talked about the offense and what we think is likely to be the case, or how that will play out for us. We look at our division. I think Oakland got better. There's no question they got better. The Angels very early in the offseason made a flurry of moves, and they've got some new faces. Houston's going to look different than they've looked in recent years, at least as we sit here today. And the Rangers reconstructed a bullpen and changed some faces on the pitching staff in general. We feel like we're right in the mix. I think the early projection systems feel like we're right in the mix. We feel like we're right in the mix. And a real positive for us is the expected healthy returns of Gregory Santos and Matt Brash. It's maybe the thing that got us most in the last 2 months of last season was a bullpen that got tired. And it got the leverage innings. Really, we pushed really hard on guys like Andres Munoz and Voter and Trent Thornton early, and they were all pitching a lot and in very high leverage all the time. And I think having guys like Santos, Brash, and more time from Troy Taylor give us a lot of opportunity to improve in that area as well.
A couple problems I have with that. So basically, he's admitting that he was watching the A's, which, by the way, it's a Sacramento A's, or not. It's just called the Athletics, Jerry Dipoto. How about, and talking about Houston making moves, Texas Rangers, which I do expect them to have some kind of a bounce back season. But I think this was the season to make the big moves, because maybe I'm wrong, but I don't see Houston as what they were in like 22 or even 23. I would like to say that the Sacramento A's can do something, but you never know. Angels are the Angels for now, at least, except they do kick the Mariners' butts. They did in 24. Texas, I expect to bounce back. So basically, Jerry Dipoto admitted that he wasted an entire offseason of not making good moves. And the whole thing that bothers me about the bullpen, where he's saying that, oh, yeah, we had to overwork Andres Munoz and other guys. No one forced him to cut Tyson Miller, and nobody forced him to cut or to trade Paul Sewald and Kendall Graveman last time I checked.
Well,
he did that to himself.
But it's also because you and Scott Sturvis have a hard pitch count line where you guys pull pitchers at 88 pitches instead of letting them pitch that extra inning to get to the 100 pitch mark. You're pulling pitchers at 1 inning early, which forces the onus on the bullpen to close out games. So naturally, your bullpen's going to get overworked. Okay. To your point, 100% correct. But the one thing is we don't know if Gregory Santos is going to be ready for spring training. Matt Brash won't be back until July to begin with anyway. So that's going to you're like the first half of the season is going to be without. So there's that as well too. But when you look at this division, are the Mariners right now better than the Houston Astros? Yes or no?
No.
Are the Mariners better than the Texas Rangers right now? Yes or no?
No. Especially if they're healthy. If they're injured, maybe neck and neck.
Right. See that, and that's my point, right? The biggest reasons why the biggest reason why the Texas Rangers came back down to earth last year is because a lot of their players, a lot of their key players, were out for large portions of the season. And when Houston got healthy, Houston took a half a season to get healthy, but when they got healthy, they started playing very good baseball. Right now, are the Seattle Mariners better than the Sacramento A's?
Barely, not saying much, but they could be a surprise team because they actually spent the money this time. You don't think so?
No. I think the only thing that the Mariners have on every team in this division is their starting rotation.
And it's not saying much.
I think the Houston Astros have a better bullpen. I think the Texas Rangers are going to have a better bullpen. I even think that the Sacramento A's potentially are going to have a better bullpen. So for me, it's like, in order to win this division, you're going to have to at least win 92 games this year. And that's like a little bit
more just to be sure.
Right, but that's a bare minimum, 92 games. In order to grab a wild card spot, you're going to have to win at least 88 in this league, in the American League. You're going to have to win at least 88. Is this offense, true or false? Is this offense capable of winning 88 games this year?
Absolutely
as is
not.
Going into spring training right now. That's exactly
absolutely
right.
Not.
And if they wasted the entire offseason bringing back Jorge Polanco and Donovan Solano and reclamation bullpen pieces, to plug the gap until they get Matt Brash back, and you're going to get Santos back. What makes anybody think that they're going to be aggressive at the trading deadline?
They won't. And there was one pitcher or even two pitchers that I truly wanted real badly going into for this offseason. I wanted Paul Sewald because I think he can have a bounce back away from his Arizona year. And I wanted to give Kendall Graveman a spring training invite just to see what he can do.
Right.
He may be older.
And I think he's coming off in like a season-long injury as well, too. So you have no idea how his rehab was. But I was 100% with you. The other guy that I wanted, I wanted the Mariners to make that trade with Boston to bring in Yoshida and Cassis. Because it would have freed up $25 million. I would have tried to get off of what's his bucket, the backup catcher.
Mitch Garver.
Thank you very much. And just to free up cap. And then I would have made a run at the shoreline lefty to go into that rotation because Blake Snell, because I think the Mariners need a left-handed starter in that rotation.
They do.
And just to break it up a little bit. So you still would have had a pitching as your strength. You could still bring back Polanco. You can still do Donovan Solano. All those other moves you can still do, but it frees up a little bit more cap space where maybe you might could bring back a Paul Sewald.
Could have, should have, could have, would have.
And by the way, if the Mariners made that deal with Boston and you have Tristan Cassis at first base and your DH is Yoshida in that lineup with Julio, Cal Raleigh, and Randy Arozarena, now that's actually a nice little middle of the order that the Mariners have. That's actually a little bit more dangerous. And your starting rotation exits Luis Castillo, brings in Blake Snell, and now your bullpen, to start the season at least, is going to be Paul Sewald, Munoz, Trent Thornton, Taylor, and then the other guy that I like. Why can't I think of his name right now?
Saucedo, Spire, Santos, Troy
Spire,
Taylor, Colin Snyder.
Colin Snyder, that's the guy that I like. And now all of a sudden, when you ask those questions again, is this team better than Houston? Well, it's kind of on par. Is this team better than Texas? That's a definitive yes. Is this team better than Oakland? Miles.
Is it better than Angels? Absolutely.
Absolutely, right? So now all of a sudden you make that deal, you free up cap space, or you free up money. You bring in Blake Snell, you still bring in Donovan Solano, and you bring in Jorge Polanco, but you have Yoshida and Cassis in that lineup, and your bullpen has Paul Sewald back in it, and all of a sudden now it's like you can conceive that come July 1st, this team is going to be neck and neck for that division lead. going into July, heading into the deadline, where if you need to make a trade to kind of bolster things up, then you can make it, and then you can go on your run.
Now let's head over to question 6, which I, by the way, agree what could have been done. Now question 6.
He's pretty awesome. Made the All-Star team. You know, his first half was dynamic. Second half, he got a little pooped. We asked him to throw a lot. A lot of those 1+ coming in the 8th. He was faced with a lot of inherited runners in the 8th inning, and really made him walk a thin line. And I think that was largely a result of a bullpen that got thinned out very quickly in spring training when we lost Munoz, or when we lost Santos and Brash. So, you know, it's add that to what was, you know, a significantly different outcome in the early going last year for Gabe Spire, and our bullpen just looked different. But, you know, we feel pretty confident in the way we construct the bullpen and our group in general. Mooney's healthy. I believe he's already been up to 100 in his bullpen sessions, which is kind of what he does. And we'll see him next week, I'm sure, on the mounds with the others down in Peoria.
Let's just get to the 6th question, because we've already pretty much talked about it. But here is the next question, also related to the bullpen.
For Brash, our expectation, Matt's had a great rehab. You know, fingers crossed. He's down in Peoria already. He has really not had a roadblock to date. Our current expectation is that he's ready to go when we start rolling in spring training, and our present timeline is that we should get him back somewhere around the 3rd week of April, which is pretty exciting. And obviously that's tentative. It could change, and obviously it wouldn't be at all shocking if he did experience some setback as he starts to ramp up into game mode. But we haven't seen that yet, and I think Matt's very encouraged with how he feels and the like. Similarly, Gregory Santos, who missed a lot of time last year, he's already down in spring training, throwing his bullpens at 100% effort, and he looks good to go from day one, which is equally as exciting. We are going to be without Troy Taylor for a little bit at the start of spring training. He's had a bit of a lat strain in his off-season workouts that popped up about a week ago. And we're going to take it easy on him with the throwing when we get started. So he's more TBD, and we would expect that there's at least some potential that he's going to have to start the season down in Arizona rather than with the club as he ramps into the throwing speed.
Let's talk about the fact that I think there was a huge disconnect between Dan Wilson and Jerry Dipoto, because Dan Wilson said that Matt Brash may be ready by midseason, which is typically June to July. And then Jerry Dipoto says, no, he could be ready by, like maybe end of April.
Week of April.
And it's like, honestly, at this point, I would believe Dan Wilson more because he's more connected with the team, so he knows directly what's going on. Jerry Dipoto, like, we know where this guy's come from. He's a liar. He's the same guy that ghosted Scott Service. So why should I trust anything that Jerry Dipoto says? And he's talking about the fact that these pitchers are banged up. How about this? How about let Dan Wilson, and if Dan Wilson believes in it, and maybe this isn't advice to Dan Wilson, if your starters are pitching borderline no-hitters in perfect games, which, by the way, Scott Service pulled those guys out before, especially against Detroit, and then they lose, yeah, big shocker. Let's have these starters go into the 8th innings, because what's the point of...
Well, you know, the thing, you're absolutely right, because guys like Gilbert, guys like Kirby, guys like Miller, and guys like Wu have been around for a couple of years now. They've been stretched out. They've been through a season. They understand exactly how to get through a season. And I would probably assume that they know how to conserve their energy in their pitches in order to get through 6-7 innings. You know what I mean? Without emptying the gas tank, right? And that comes back to Dan Wilson trusting his players. You know what I mean? Luis Castillo is something completely different, because he's going to try to strike everybody out and burn gas and be done by the 5th. Okay, that's fine. So at least one day a week, you're going to have a bullpen day. But for the rest of those guys that have been there and done it now for a couple seasons in the big leagues, understand when to step on the gas, when to take their foot off of it, when to conserve pitches, when to throw ground ball outs. You know what I mean? These guys are more than capable of going into the 7th inning if you need them to do that, so you're not burning out your bullpen. But the other thing is, It's because they didn't have, because Gabe Spire didn't have a great year because they were without both Santos and Brash last year. They really didn't have that number 8 guy, that 8th inning guy, that setup guy. So unfortunately, they had to ride Andres Munoz like Zorro last year, which is the exact same reason why Matt Brash got hurt to begin with in the first place. Because Scott Serves threw like 74 innings the year before. You know what I mean? Like multi-inning performances and things like that. And as much as I love Matt Brash, it's like, if your whole reasoning is because you don't want to get your starting pitchers hurt, which is the reason why you're gassing out your bullpen. So why would you do it to one of your best pitchers in your bullpen? Why would you have them go multi-innings every single outing? Why wouldn't you go out there and bring in an 8th inning guy? And they did at the deadline. As a matter of fact, they got him from Toronto. It didn't work out for him.
Because he was already banged up.
I was in Detroit when he came out of the bullpen, he coughed up. I think he coughed up the tying run, or coughed up the 2-run home run in which they lost. The Mariners couldn't come back from it. So full credit. They tried to bring in that bullpen arm at the deadline. It just didn't work out. But that being said, it's like still you have a responsibility to your players. If you're doing it for your starting rotation, then you have to do it with your bullpen too.
There has to be a balance. And now to the final question.
I guess in reverse, he's a pro. Yes is the answer. We did once his name leaked as having been discussed in trade talks, we did connect with Louis, obviously his agent, Rafa, and not shockingly, he was a pro about the whole thing. And I think the piece that really didn't get discussed a lot publicly, at least in what I saw, is, he has a full no trade protection for, at least for this year. And anything that we did was going to be communicated through Luis. So it's not like we were trying to hide the fact that his name had come up. And it did, and not shockingly, we had inquiries on all 5 of our starting pitchers and dozens of prospects along the way. But obviously we opted not to go that route. We had more than a few deals that made you scratch your head and say, hey, what do you think, guys? But by and large, we just feel like the value of what our pitching staff as a whole provides us. There's a reason why we're so good pitching at home. And because the guys attack the strike zone, they're really good at what they do. They buy into our programs. And I think the key to what I said earlier, we're a good home team. We're one of the best home teams in the American League. And, why disrupt that? And more like I had addressed in, October when I met with the group at the end of the season was we're about our pitching. We're going to lean into it. And, this is who we are. But, it would be foolish of us not to at least listen when teams call. And, it's not like we just send it to voicemail. So, obviously we chose to hold on to Louis and the other 4 starting pitchers. And as we expected when the offseason began, pretty quiet offseason. And I think that's reflective of a team that didn't have a whole lot of holes to fill. And, we feel great about our farm system. We feel great about the stability in our team. And we feel like our offense doesn't get enough credit for the things that they do well. And
it was a pretty quiet offseason because you didn't want to trade your pitching, you didn't want to trade your prospects, and you didn't want to spend money. Keep it real, Jerry. That's the reason why you had a very quiet offseason.
And you were too scared of giving up the prospects, which you should have done, because we can all agree that you've had a track record where you've had some successful ones, but you've also had a track record where you had Jared Kelenic.
Yeah. But let's understand that's the reason why Castillo didn't get traded, because of his no trade clause. I would probably assume that if Castillo would waive his no trade clause to go, he's going to a team that's going to be a playoff team. It's your LA Dodgers, your New York Yankees, your New York Mets, your Atlanta Braves, so on and so forth, right? You're not going to go to the Boston Red Sox, who are, a 500 team at best, right? So I would like to think that was the main reason they had a deal on the table. I would like to think the Mariners liked it, and they got a hold of Castillo, and he said, "No, I'm good."
And here are my final thoughts on this whole thing, this whole entire offseason disaster. Like last season, I really thought that was the worst offseason I had seen. But now, this one takes it to a whole new level. First, it started out that Jerry and Justin were saying that they were going to fix this team in the infield specifically, which unfortunately has not happened. The Mariners have not done anything in the free agent market when they had several opportunities. They could have gotten Christian Walker at a reasonable price if they were willing to bump up their alleged and ridiculous payroll. And then what about the fact that the Mariners completely fumbled on the Luis Castillo trade opportunity where they could have gotten Masataka Yoshida, who could have been a very consistent and sustainable designated hitter, and Tristan Casas. But why did that not happen? Because you did not want to take on the contract of Masataka Yoshida. Yes, he's like close to $20 million, but it's certainly a heck of a lot better than having Mitch Haniger on the team, who is eating up $15 million to basically do absolutely nothing. And I expect him to basically play like 2010 Ken Griffey Jr. And if you want to know how bad that 2010 Ken Griffey Jr. was, go look up his stats, because they were just disgusting to look at. And then the other reason why you dodged to trade Luis Castillo for Tristan Casas and Masataka Yoshida was because you're so-called concerned with the T-Mobile Park situation. Like, that's like got to be the worst kind of reason I've ever heard. Like, yes, granted, T-Mobile Park is a very difficult place to play, especially as an offensive hitter. But here's the few things that you do have the advantage. You have the best pitching staff in baseball, the starters specifically, and also the fact that you have Edgar Martinez and Kevin Seitzer, who can coach the likes of a Tristan Casas and everyone else to play up to par, because we did see that in the last month of the season, which Jerry Dipoto did admit, which he wasn't exactly 100% wrong, that the Mariners actually did have a top 5 offense in September. They really did. And it's not like their schedule was that any easier. It was kind of split between an easy schedule and a tough schedule. But that just shows that Edgar Martinez can get it done. He can coach this offense to maybe at least a top 15 offense, whether they are at T-Mobile Park or on the road. So that was a huge missed opportunity, and that could have freed up a little bit more money to address the bullpen problem. And that bullpen is very concerning when you have Matt Brash possibly not available until June, which, by the way, I'm going to buy the words that Dan Wilson said, because I don't want to believe anything that Jerry Dipoto said, because he said, what, by end of April? But then yet Dan Wilson says that it's going to be around mid-June. So clearly there is some kind of miscommunication. But does that surprise me? Absolutely not, because this is the same general manager that completely fumbled on communication when the firing of Scott Service happened. And what did you do? You did it through Twitter via Ken Rosenthal. So the communication just wasn't there. And there's a reason why Scott Service is pretty much all the way in San Diego, pretty much just on the beach with a pretty more lax job. There's a reason for that. And there's a reason why him and Jerry are probably not friends anymore. And also the other concern I have is the bullpen. Oh yeah, we already talked about this, that Matt Brash may not be available. Gregory Santos, you don't know if he's going to be healthy. Jackson Kowar, you haven't really heard anything. And then you got Troy Taylor, who is injured, who's suffering an injury right now, may not even be ready by opening day, which we didn't really talk about that much throughout the show. And I really do think that they could have gone for like a Paul Sewald or Kendall Graveman, which they absolutely at least give Kendall Graveman a spring training invite just to see where he's at. Granted, he's had a terrible injury bug, but give it a chance or spend some money on actual bullpen pitchers. I mean, you just cannot like really just go throughout offseason and just say, oh yeah, I can just pick this guy off the street and he's going to basically become another Colin Snyder, Paul Sewald, Kendall Graveman. You can't just depend on that. It doesn't always work that way. And it showed with the whole thing of the bullpen just being completely burned out because, I mean, Scott Service did work this bullpen to death. And I don't care what the numbers say. It was that you're pulling your starters, which naturally means that you are putting your bullpen to much more work because bullpens cannot pitch as long as you don't want the bullpen to pitch longer than an inning or two, which I would prefer 2 innings. But then you're just wasting arms after arms because also you have to put into account that they're also throwing relief. They're also throwing practice pitches in the bullpen, so you got to account to that. And as much as I want to say John Stanton has been a very disgraceful of an owner, which he really has been, and even worse, in my opinion, than Nintendo, because John Stanton that said that all of this stuff was going to be available to get the most top flight free agents back in the 2018s, back in the 2020s when they were rebuilding. And that never happened. The most prominent free agents that the Mariners ever got by bats was Mitch Garver and AJ Pollock. That's literally it, and that's just absolutely pathetic. They had several opportunities to even get the Korean star Hye-Sung Kim. That never really happened. They had opportunities to get Christian Walker. They had opportunities to basically get anyone that can fix this offense. But the problem with this team is they are banking. Now, hold on. Before that, John Stanton, he is a pathological liar. Like, at least Howard Lincoln and Chuck Armstrong, at least they were honest. They were honest that they didn't care about winning. Howard Lincoln said that the goal wasn't to win a World Series. It was just to become a competitive team year after year. But John Stanton says, oh yeah, we're going to add nope. Adding the resources that never really happened with the exception of that trade deadline. That still didn't work out. And now the Mariners are going into the season. Jerry Dipoto is just delusionally thinking that he could turn this team into... Like, he thinks that this team's going to bounce back or play well based on bounce backs of Jorge Polanco, J.P. Crawford, Randy Arozarena, who had a down year. You're also banking on, can Victor Robles do that for an entire season? I can't trust that. You can't trust Julio Rodriguez, even the best player on the team, because he is plagued with massive inconsistencies. So, as much as John Stanton has been a disgrace of an owner, Jerry Dipoto and Justin Hollander should be just as accountable because they also do a terrible job with the little payroll that they do have. Why not spend the prospects? Like, take a risk. And even if the trade doesn't work out, at least you tried, and at least you can make up for the next tier prospects that you guys do have, that you guys do rave about. Honestly, with how this team is going, and what they have, and the fact that the team is also proven to not be healthy, they have health problems, I expect this to be a fringe 80 to 85 win team with no playoffs. I don't see a division. I don't see them overtaking Houston, which, by the way, this was probably the most open window of a championship window I've ever seen. The Mariners have Ken Griffey Jr., Edgar Martinez, Alex Rodriguez, Randy Johnson. They never had that window. They purely never had that window. Well, they did have the window. What I'm saying was they didn't have that easy of a window because they had to deal with the Yankees, the Cleveland Indians, maybe a couple years of the Boston Red Sox, Baltimore Orioles. Like, that was a top-heavy tier of competition. But this year, they've got a division where Houston seems to be aging a bit. You got Sacramento A's that are in a very uncertain situation. The Angels are the Angels, just run by broken Artie Moreno. Texas Rangers, I expect them to have some kind of a bounce back because they were injured last year. But the Yankees aren't the Yankees that they used to be. The Cleveland Guardians, led by Stephen Vogt, they still go cheap. So the opportunity is there, but the Mariners are wasting every bit of it. And time is running out. Because you got a lot of the core players like Cal Raleigh, George Kirby, Logan Gilbert, Bryce Miller, Brian Wu. Half of them are already on arbitration years. A couple of them are in pre-arbitration. Once those two, Bryce Miller and Brian Wu, get into arbitration, what are you going to do then? Trade those players away? And then the contention window closes? I'll be honest. I think I kept saying it, since 23 that they only had a 3-year window. Well, I think this year could be it. Because when you go into next year, because they said that they had just enough money to keep everyone, What's going to happen next year when those prices of arbitration goes up? They may be traded away. So 2025, like the crazy thing is there's still time to salvage this. Bregman's still on the market. Pete Alonso's on the market. If John Stanton could just please spend a little bit more money. If you want me to start a GoFundMe, fine. I will start a GoFundMe if you really want that kind of help, because you're too much of a greedy you-know-what to spend a little bit more money. Now, it is your business to spend however you want to manage the money you want. It's your business. But when you're in a business where you're expected to build a winner and build a solid product, then you should at least spend a little bit more money. I'm not saying go after the max free agents like 10 years, 15 years. Just go over what's enough to help complement this core team, because if you can bring the core players in, if you can bring the supporting players to support the core players, that will put less pressure. But now you're putting pressure on all the core players to really play their balls off, where some may risk injury because they have to do more than what's expected, which is not fair to them. It's not fair to the players. It's not fair to the fans. It's not even fair to Dan Wilson. Not even fair to Edgar Martinez and Kevin Seitzer. It's not fair to us content creators either, that put our heart and soul to actually cover this team. Now, don't get me wrong. Mariners could be a 100-loss team. They could be the biggest losers, and I'm still going to cover this team. But it just makes it this frustrating that I have now seen like this is now the 4th different playoff window that I have seen with the Mariners. The 90s, granted I was too young, they wasted all of that. Early 2001 core, wasted all of that. The Robinson Cano and Nelson Cruz core, wasted all of that. And now this core with the greatest pitching staff in Mariners history, the starting rotation, even better than what Randy Johnson had with Jamie Moyer and Jeff Fassero, even better than 2001 with Freddie Garcia, Jamie Moyer, Aaron Seeley, Paul Abbott, Joel Pinheiro. Even better than that, and it's on the verge to be completely thrown away. And let's not mention, too, that Mariners also have generational talent in Julio Rodriguez. They also have a solid, great catcher in Cal Raleigh, who's probably going to be better than what Dan Wilson was, with the exception of the batting average, of course. But all I'm going to say is Mariners are running out of time. And I hope that the collective efforts of us, Couch GM, Mariners Mojo, Locked On Mariners, Raise the Trident, J Trident Podcast, Couch GM if I didn't mention it, even Locked On Mariners, we all have put in the effort out there to tell you guys what is wrong. Like, we are the ones holding you guys accountable. And we hope that if this video comes up on your feed, Mr. John Stanton, Justin Hollander, Jerry Dipoto, we are the voice of the fans. Please listen to us. We're not telling you to go after complete max free agents. We're just telling you to just spend what is enough to help support this core team. And no shortcuts. None of this getting Donovan Solano and getting back Jorge Polanco. It's got to be more than that. Now, I'm not saying you have to necessarily go for, like, I guess in hindsight, you didn't really have to go for Juan Soto, but at least try to see what you can get out of Pete Alonso and Alex Bregman at least. Their prices, it's not like their window's shutting with the whole free agent, so their prices may go down. I'm not saying it will, but there is an opportunity to at least make it negotiable. As someone that also works in the real estate business, when a house is on the market for too long, at least there's an opportunity to negotiate. And that's what the Mariners should be doing, is seeing what you can negotiate to get these guys onto the team. But that's going to do it. Thought I'd just put out my last thoughts, considering I also had a show with Steve. Thank you very much for watching. Hit the like button, subscribe, and painfully saying, Go Mariners.